Hi, I'm Ray Magdalullo. I'm the hiring and training supervisor at the Oregon Child Abuse Hotline. In preparation for our work on recognizing and reducing bias and oppression in child welfare, we are providing the voices of people with lived experience to highlight the impact that child welfare has on the people we serve. So often we don't get to hear the stories directly from those who are affected by the work that we do. So today we're joined by Clint, Diane, and Sarah, who all have experience being served by the child welfare system, and all are members of the opt-in parent advisory and have graciously offered us time to share their experiences. Why don't we start off with some introductions? If you wouldn't mind, would you please tell us a little bit about your story and your experience being served by child welfare? Clint, would you mind starting us off and taking about 5 minutes and sharing your story first? And then I'll move on to Diane and then Sarah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Clint Wilson. I am a person with a shared life experience. I am a person in long term or a dad in long term recovery. My clean date is 5/30 of 2014, coming up on 11 years now. I am a parent mentor at Morrison Adult and Family Services, have been for about 3.5 years. I'm a member of the Fathers Advisory Board here in the state of Oregon. And also, as you heard, I'm a member of the Opt-in Advisory and Subcommittee and Convening Committee, which will be putting on a symposium at the end of this month. I am, like I told you before, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm someone that has been to prison 6 times in 3 different states. I probably have about 15 years of incarceration time under my belt. I am someone that was in that abused drugs for over 27 years and was also on parole for 27 years. I've had 2 open DHS cases. I have 2 baby girls, 2 babies' moms, and I've had 2 open cases with each. My first case opened, and the mother of my child went to inpatient treatment, and my daughter was reunified, and I didn't hear anything from DHS throughout that whole experience, and her case was closed, and she was reunified with my oldest daughter. The second child welfare case that I had with my youngest daughter, she was 2 years old, and I learned about my child welfare case while I was in inpatient treatment. Mind you, that was my 13th inpatient treatment. And I graduated that successfully, ended up going and doing all the things that DHS required for me to be a safe parent, and I was able to reunify with my youngest daughter. The mother of my oldest daughter, she had relapsed and had gone back out, and I also was able to be a full custodial parent to my oldest daughter. So now I'm raising both my daughters, and I also have been raising my niece now for about the last 7.5 years. And so I've got essentially 3 little girls here. I've got a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And I keep looking for parenting manuals for little girls that age, but can't find them anywhere. But anyway, so yeah, I have a lot more to say about that. And I guess we will do that in the near future in this meeting.
Hi there. My name is Diane De Leon, and I am a parent with lived experience in Douglas County. I sit on the State Parent Advisory Council with executive leadership at Child Welfare, and I also sit on the first local parent advisory council in the state of Oregon in Douglas County. Um, I am a mother to two beautiful children, and which I raised by myself. Since they were returned home in 2014. I come from generational addiction. I was pretty young when my cases were open. My kids were little. I was pregnant with my son. My daughter was 3. Um, from start to finish, I didn't touch drugs until I was 18 years old, and it took less than 4 years for me to completely lose everything, which ultimately saved my life by child welfare getting involved. My cases were opened in 2010. Um, my son was born drug addicted to opiates. And on morphine for the first month of his life. He required a medical foster home. My kids were ultimately placed in their dad's cousin, so it was family, but I never met her prior. So even getting my kids taken didn't stop me. I mean, because I can love my children all I wanted, but that didn't keep me clean. I didn't go to treatment until my son was 3 months old. And I was on a downward departure the first time I got kicked out of treatment, because you can take the drugs from me all you want. I was still a criminal at the end of the day. I was raised that way, and I needed some serious inpatient treatment. And so the judge revoked my downward departure, and I went to prison for 24 months while my cases were open. So a good portion of that was me spent in prison. I got home in 2013. It didn't take me very long to get my kids back. I got my first apartment. I mean, things were going well. I completed all of the programs I was supposed to. I left with wonderful relationships with child welfare. That's how I got into this work. My kids were returned home in 2014. My cases were closed in 2015. And all I did was answer a phone call from Jessica Hunter, who is one of the program managers in Douglas County, and she asked me if I wanted to sit on an interview panel, and that's how it started. We were really excited to get a parent advisory council in Douglas County, and so I sat on the state parent advisory council for a year before we were actually able to make it happen. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of making that happen. I thought we were the last to get a parent advisory council, but we are actually the first local as far as the districts go. And so everything I do is stemmed from that. I've sat on interview panels. I mean, I've done so much stuff. I've been able to go places I would never be able to go, meet wonderful people. And ultimately, the reason why I started doing this was because my story with child welfare is a little bit different than the normal story you hear. Most of the time, people are, saying awful things about them and how they hate them. And mine was just a little bit different. I mean, was it hard? Absolutely. But my case wasn't bad. And so I wanted to show people that you can come out on the end of it and have, a great relationship with child welfare, or in the sense that it doesn't have to be bad. And so that's kind of what drove me to do this. And then I found out that they cared about what I said or what I had to say. And it really just inspired me to continue to want to feel safe to give my feedback, because you can speak all you want, but it doesn't mean they're listening. And so every time I'm in the rooms, I'm in a meeting, I'm meeting with my other members, like I feel heard, I feel safe. And they're super protective over their council members, and they appreciate us, and I couldn't ask for more. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Clement. I am a woman in long-term recovery. I'm just shy of 19 years by a month, no fronts. And I have worked in the recovery industry with parents using my lived experience for the last 9 years. I was a parent mentor for 8 years, a peer supervisor for 2, and I am a traditional healthcare worker. I'm a peer support specialist. I'm a certified recovery mentor too, and a CADC1, which is a drug and alcohol counselor. I'm on the Mental Health and Addiction Council for Clackamas County, so I'm a councilwoman. I'm very proud of that, to be a voice in my local county. I live in the county that my child welfare experience happened. I was born and raised in Clackamas County. I'm on the local parent advisory board, the opt-in, and I'm also on a national parent advisory board, 0 to 3. Um, and what I'd like to share today is a little bit about my story. It was quite a while ago, but it still impacts me every day, and I still draw from that experience to fight for system change and help people as best I can to not go through what I went through. So in 2006, my son was 6 years old, my oldest son, and he started going to kindergarten, and that's really when trouble started. I don't have a background in criminality. I always stayed home with my kids. I was stuck at, I was really serious about trying to do the best I can with what I had. And after some traumatic stuff happened, with my youngest son's father, so some severe domestic violence, I started using substances to cope. And so during I had a substance use disorder, um, and two small children. They were 3 and 6 at the time. Um, but the calls started coming in with my kindergartner, right? Like I wasn't outside to pick him up from the bus, and I started getting knocks at the door, like what's going on? And my son, he was not doing well because he was also, experiencing that trauma. And so there was a lot of outward, visible signs that there was trouble in the home going on. So, I think I had two calls before my child welfare case opened. The third one, uh, I was working with a caseworker. I had a safety plan. My kids kept getting outside, that kind of thing. Going to the playground at the apartment complex. And so the caseworker helped us like install locks at the top of our doors. And like I was working with them, and I truly wanted to, you know, be a safe parent. Like, and so at that point, I feel like it was a long time ago. There wasn't any mentors, but if I had been issued a mentor at that point, in I think my case would have turned out a whole lot different. But there came a time where the caseworker had started working behind my back, contacting my oldest son's father, asking him if he could come and get my son because otherwise he would go into care. And so we suffered a lot of trauma during the removal process. And the dad came from Seattle, said he was going to take him to the coast for the weekend, and he never came back. So I felt like my child had been stolen. And then um, my youngest son got out of the house again. I remember that morning so vividly. We went down for a nap, and I had forgotten to lock the door. And I remember him jumping over me because I always had him sleep next to the wall so I could feel when he was moving around. And I just couldn't wake up. I was too tired. And so he got out, he went to the playground again, and then I had the cop bang on my door, right? And what was so traumatic about that was I opened the door and my son and the caseworker were standing across the parking lot. And my son, I ran to go get him, and the cop stopped me and he grabbed me by my shoulders and he sat me down on a chair on my front porch and he started verbally abusing me, spitting in my face, very close to my face. And it's like I had that relationship with the caseworker up until that point. And so she had told me that um, Adam might have to go somewhere else to be cared for. So I was kind of like like it could have went down a whole lot different. But what I'm saying is my my Adam went into care at that point, and I just remember that being the loneliest day of my life. My children were all taken from me. I didn't know where Adam went. I didn't know what the next steps were. I I was just completely traumatized and I was left at my house alone. And I think it was like a long weekend because I just remember sitting there for days until my court hearing. Um, and that's just like, that's the beginning. But throughout the case, I was a yes woman. I was an A student. Um, I messed up in court and I was like, no, I wasn't neglecting my child. And they're like, oh, do you need to go? Do you not want to go to trial? And so all these things kind of played out when I didn't know what was going to happen, that was going to disrupt my case. I ended up not only seeing my son 1 hour a week until the court hearing. I went into treatment. They wouldn't place him until the court hearing 5 months later. So even though I was in a safe place, they didn't place my son with me for 5 months. So, um, and then of course, he came to live with me at the treatment center. We graduated treatment. We got our first apartment and we've never looked back. But I did not get my older son back for 7 years. I finally begged his dad. I didn't see him for a year. Um, so there's a lot of trauma still in my family from that. It obliterated my family, and that's why I want to come back and tell my story so that that doesn't happen to other families. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you again for your introductions. Again, we're all so happy that you're here and sharing your time with us. So we had asked Orca supervisors and screeners what questions they would like to ask people who have experience navigating through the child welfare system. So, we asked if you were able to ask anything to someone that has lived experience in our system, what would you want to know? And we compiled some of those questions to ask all of you. So I'm just going to jump in and I'm going to ask the first question. And if anybody wants to answer, you could just go on in and start answering. So the first question I'm going to ask is, have you ever read a report about your family, and how did it feel reading the report that was written about you?
This is actually a great question. I was, I really just don't think age had anything to do with it, but I was young. I was 23, 24. And the only thing I can remember when I hear those words is how unbelievably stupid that made me feel. Um, I wish that it was more parent friendly, in the sense of, um, child welfare uses a lot of acronyms and abbreviations or terms that parents may not understand, and I can't say it enough. I felt stupid. I really did. Reading through all of these things, you're in the worst time of your life. You've just had your kids removed and you're reading these accusations against you. And it was like, being in a room, with people pointing the finger at you, telling you all the things that you've done wrong. I think my cases might have even been before you started out with strengths of the parent. And so it really was just a hit in the gut, to read, all of the paperwork that they had, about, I mean, and depending on how vulnerable you are or where you at in your recovery, I mean, they could send somebody over the edge. And so I fear that parents are not in the place that they need to be, because they get that paperwork so soon of, everything that, child welfare says you did or whatever it be. It took a long time for me to be able to hear those things, and actually accept them. And so for one, I am so grateful for the parent mentor program, because it allows them to help them, through this process, whether that's reading paperwork from the start. But I still wish even paperwork that I've seen now, doesn't seem to be as parent friendly as it should. And so that is my hope for that going forward.
Was there information that was obtained at screening that followed you throughout your work with child welfare that you felt was incorrect? And how did that impact you?
Yeah, this I think is probably one of my biggest topics, I'd say. With my second child welfare case, there were accusations by the mother that I had physically abused her, but even more so that I had sexually touched my kiddos. And so I know that throughout my DHS case, I was able to, or I was given one visit a week for 30 minutes. And at the DHS office, I had to go through multiple psych evals and things along those lines. But truth be told, is just even stating such an accusation, even in this space, um, I know for self, if I ever hear somebody bring up a topic like that, it always has me thinking like, but what if, or what if that happened? And so I guess even to this day, as far as trauma and things like that go, it bothers the heck out of me all the time, just to even have walked that walk. And uh my oldest daughter, who's 17 now, uh I would say probably 3 years ago, she also, found out that information and about those accusations, because the mother of my child had come to her school, and where she had been pulled out of her class and was asked a bunch of questions. And she came home and acted, just super traumatized and embarrassed and ashamed and all the things, just from just that experience alone. um it's just been a horrific experience. And it continues to, like, uh the mother of my youngest daughter isn't in our lives whatsoever. I know that she currently suffers from multiple psychological um, things, for lack of better words, in this moment. But I know my oldest daughter, she absolutely has a ton of biases. I mean, I probably wouldn't be helpful to speak on the words that she wants to say about that experience. I mean, it was horrific for her. So, And then now, obviously parenting her, um, she doesn't even like to hear the mother of my child's name without her having some type of reaction or, something negative to say. So, um, yeah, just that report, the whole walk with that whole, that whole tag throughout my case all the way till the end. I wasn't able to reunify with my youngest daughter for 15 months. And yeah, it was just horrific. And even to this day, just those accusations just still make me kind of cringe and make me a little sick to my stomach. So yeah, that's it about that.
Yeah, Clint, actually, I have a follow-up question for you on that too, because you're talking about how the report had such a big impact on your family. And I'm wondering, were there any specific instances during the investigation where you felt that maybe assumptions or biases about what was reported about you influenced how you were treated?
I was actually really, really blessed. I honestly didn't know that I had an open DHS case until I had put myself into an inpatient treatment center. My DHS casework, so I never heard anything, was never asked anything from a CPS worker. It was I all of a sudden a DHS worker was at my treatment center. That's where I learned that I could even be a custodial parent because my first walk with DHS, um, I didn't have any communication with the caseworker. My daughter went to the mother in treatment. And so at that point in time, I thought my best case scenario was just visitation of my little girls. And I thought, and with her showing up at my treatment facility, that's where she let me know that I could be a custodial parent. Because I asked her the question, I said, "Well, what are my chances on seeing my daughter?" Uh, and that's where she informed me that we don't place your child with the mother, so to speak, because that was my belief. We placed the child with the best fit parent, and when I heard that, the rest was history. I whip the horses underneath me because I wanted to do everything, and I was willing and wanting to absolutely do anything, and I was open to new suggestions and new ideas. And like I stated earlier, it was my 13th inpatient, so I probably could have taught some of the classes, but I was willing to explore things like uh, mental health and just a bunch of different things because my problem was never getting clean. I mean, I've been arrested so many times in so many treatment centers and those types of things. My deal was staying clean, and that's where I had to learn to do something different. Um, but yeah, so I never had any real interaction with CPS whatsoever. It was all just when my DHS caseworker showed up, but she was amazing because she led in with curiosity and questions. And to me, that was spot on amazing for me. And no, I didn't trust anybody within systems because I told you earlier that I've had such a involvement with the judicial and being incarcerated so much of my life that I thought everybody was a police. I thought everybody was a cop. It didn't matter who you were. So yeah, over time though, I really learned to really build a great relationship with my caseworker. And in fact, I'm still friends with my caseworker and in fact, I owe her coffee next time. So, uh, I guess I should follow up and I should probably reach out. So,
So Clint just talked about how he found it difficult trusting systems after his experience. And so, Sarah, I'd like to ask you, how did the experience of being investigated by CPS affect your sense of safety and stability and your trust in systems that are supposed to help?
So every time that a caseworker came to my door or contacted me, I was on DEFCON 5 alert. Like, I was so scared. I would clean my house top to bottom. I would like try and make things because I at that point my substance use disorder was at at its height. So I would try and give people that I was okay and that when my kids were okay and everything was fine. And so I was trying to like play this role of like, you know, um, but it was very scary. It was really scary. And then by the time I started working with the CPS worker on a safety plan, um, we had built a relationship. And I did not trust her, but I was doing everything that she asked me to do. I didn't know I had a choice. I didn't know I didn't have to let her in. I didn't know all those things. And I think the system expects that from parents who've never been involved with child welfare. So of course I let them in. They saw my home. They saw my children's bed. They saw the food. They saw uh, it was a working household. So, but, you know, it was terrifying. And then that relationship was instantly broken when they put a policeman in between my child, the caseworker, and myself. Um, things could have things should have I was not a violent criminal. I'd never been to prison. I've never, you know what I mean? Like it could have been handled so much different. And in my heart of hearts, I wish they would take it a step further and say, hey, we have a treatment bed for you and your child. You want to like jump in the car and we'll go now? Because I would have done it. I did not like where I was in my life. I was not having fun. I used just to stay alert and awake for my kids, and it just became a maintenance thing. And so if I would have known how to fix it, I would have. And I think that the state should take it a step further and have have their own facility. Yeah, I'll go to the DHS ranch. Come on. Like I would have done it because I would have done anything for my kids. And I had already lost my older son. Um, so I was in a grave state by the time. Um, and I was very well meaning. But yeah, it broke all trust having that policeman there. And it was super traumatizing.
What do you wish screeners understood about how their work impacts families when they assign a report for CPS assessment?
It's embarrassing, like because they go to the school and talk to your kids and I can only imagine what the school thinks of me, that child welfare just keeps showing up to talk to my kids. But that my kids are scared, like my daughter especially, because she was a little bit older than my son, so she remembers some of our journey and she was like, "Are they gonna like repeatedly, are they gonna take me, Mom? What's gonna happen?" And of course, I assured her that that wasn't the case, but it's just a sucky situation all the way around because, like there had been, I relapsed in 2020, and it took me a long time to accept that. It took me a long time to talk about it, because I tried asking for help. I mean, COVID wasn't good to anybody. And I asked for help and they flat out told me, you're not in active addiction. We can't help you. I'm like, I need some like relapse prevention classes. I mean, I went to my mental health services. I went to drug and alcohol services and I tried asking for help. So I can understand that they have to take these things seriously because what if I really am using again, or what if something happened? I've read some of the reports that have been written about me. And it was almost like they didn't even take the time to find out information about me, real information about me, or what I've accomplished or what I'm doing now. Like it was just drug abuser, ex-felon, like all of these things. And I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the process. I mean, and what questions they're supposed to ask. And it's very different now than it obviously was in 2010. So
Were there any aspects of your identity, such as like your race or ethnicity or income, family structure, that you think influenced how your family was treated?
I would say not at first. But me being LGBTQ was a part of the main investigation. Like as we were going to court with my kids' lawyers, he would never directly say it, but everything he submitted as evidence was I'm in a relationship with a woman. He, hired private investigators to follow us to see what we were doing. And I just feel like if I was in a relationship with a man, that it wouldn't have been happening. And so I did feel for a good portion of my case's closing that because I was a lesbian, that I was being treated differently, and who I was in a relationship with, it shouldn't have mattered. They had no criminal history. They had nothing. And so the fact that it was even brought up in court, was absolutely like, it was appalling. I'm like, it shouldn't matter who I'm in a relationship with. And so, yes, I believe that, it was brought into my case when it had no place there.
Have you ever felt discriminated against as a dad?
uh yeah, now in the work that I do, yes, absolutely. I know that my walk with child welfare was extremely difficult because there's not any services, or not as many services, that's for sure, as mothers. I feel really lucky that mothers have the availability of inpatient treatment where they can reunify with their children. In fact, a big stat in the state of Oregon is we're 50th in accessibility to treatments, and we are first in per capita for need of treatments. And I know that in the state of Oregon right now, there are 375 beds for mothers where they can access SUD treatment with their kiddos, and there are 10 for dads. So it feels like the equity there is just way off balance. So with work with the Fathers Advisory Board and help, we actually have partnered with DHS. We've been able to present to all districts in the state of Oregon, and we are trying to bring empowerment and levels of engagement for dads, because we are half of the parent population. And, for our kiddos to have the best shot at it, I feel like uh, dad should have equal opportunity. And yeah, we are getting better, but man, we still have so far to go. And also along with that too, I believe that as fathers, there's so many biases and stigmas out there, especially of us being the abusers, when that absolutely is not the case all the time. I get that it happens frequently, but there also are a lot of dads, like in my case. I mean, yes, I was absolutely a verbal and a mental abuser, absolutely. But a physical abuser, no. And it was actually the exact opposite. The mom was the one that continually put her hands on me. Um, yeah, so that's that. But you hear quite often where and I work with a lot of dads where they get labeled as aggressive or abusive just because they raise their voice. In different cultures, they have louder voices and they say things at different tones, and they immediately get, labeled as, like an abuser or aggressive or things along those lines.
Is there anything you think child welfare workers often don't know or maybe often don't realize that you wish that they did?
That we're human. At the end of the day, we are human just like they are. And to be treated like one is a great feeling, but they often dehumanize the situation from the start. And so I've always been a big believer if something starts one way, it's going to end that way too, because who am I to change their mind? And so humanizing the experience by realizing that we are human too.
And also, I would say that anybody's capable of change. Doesn't matter what type of walk they've had in their past, that everybody's capable of change.
If there was one thing you want the viewers of this video to remember, what would that be? And I'm going to have you all answer this question. How about Diane? Would you mind kicking us off?
I think that if anything becomes of, the investigation that they're doing, that they just remember that, we are human, and that it's the worst day of anybody's life, to have child welfare come into your life, regardless if they're taking your kids. That means a complaint has been made that, you're not doing what's best for your children, or you're harming them, or you're using, again, whatever it be. Nobody wants child welfare to come meddling in their life, especially after the progress we've made. And the either the how traumatized you are from your first child welfare case, or how much you've learned throughout your case. And so just don't forget that we are the experts of our own children, and all you have to do is ask us, and we will tell you. Don't be secretive about things. Don't Surely don't believe everything you hear, but there has to be a better way. It sounds like there is a good team of leadership within this hotline that want to make changes. And I'm grateful for that, and for, future participants or investigations, calls, whatever it be, that you just don't forget that not everything you hear is true.
What I would want someone to know that's watching this is that please just do a lot of self-education. I know that when I entered the recovery field, I didn't have any education in mental health because it's not my story. And so I had served some clients that had severe mental health, and I didn't understand it. And the client helped me understand it and taught me so much, but I had to go out on my own and learn about that. So they really need to be well versed in addiction and mental health and domestic violence, and to really just have all of that. Keep educating yourself, and racial bias and all of that. Like, one training isn't enough. You have to be curious about all of the mental health umbrella, um, to try and even have an inkling of understanding. But just be a curious human, and be a good human, and think, even if people are suffering from whatever it is that's bringing them to you, that there has to be a reason, and it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. But yeah, just keep educating yourself, because we are proof that we can sustain long, beautiful change and have a beautiful life. And my kids are 22 and 25 now, and I'm still coming alongside them and helping them any way I can. And I'm just really, I'm really grateful for my life. And child welfare did help me with that. They helped me get out of where I was at. It was just the way they did it. Thank you.
My suggestion would be to be open-minded, to realize that every individual is different. There is no carbon copy individual. There is no carbon copy family. And that be open-minded to possibly being wrong. It's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to grow from those mistakes, but that, to blanket a situation in some, and especially in a place where agencies hold so much power over possibilities of power over families. What a huge responsibility that you possess and have. And I just would hope that kind of like I think what I've heard everybody say in this meeting is remain human, remain empathetic, remain just a human that doesn't just blanket everybody and everything as just the same. I know for self, I know that with education and learning about trauma informed care, sometimes the message gets lost. At least for me, how I receive it. I don't want the message to be lost based on trauma informed care or operating there within. So, I just it's a real big responsibility that y'all have and possess, and uh, it's not something to be treated lightly. And because families are in the balance, and trauma absolutely does happen. And clearly, there's three of us sitting on this panel today that have experienced lots of trauma throughout their whole walk. So, some justified, absolutely. That's stuff that we have to deal with in ourselves, and just growing as humans, and the mistakes that we've made. But there's also a lot of unjust trauma that we've also endured that absolutely is not fair and continues to walk with us. So again, back to we're going to go a long ways because we got a long ways to go. So I just hope we keep that in mind.
I really want to thank and express so much gratitude to Clint and Diane and Sarah for their time and their generosity in sharing their stories with us today. Your voices are so vital and such an important piece of this larger conversation about how we can address and reduce bias, not only from the child welfare system as a whole, but how we can also think about addressing and reducing our own individual bias. And for everyone who views this, as you listened to their experience, we hope that you are able to gain further insight or perspective on how impactful our work is, and think about how we all play a role in creating a more compassionate and supportive environment for every child and for every Oregon family. So thank you all so much.